this song, Brother Roger will bring our message, 121. Whate'er you do in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord. Do not in name of man or creed, do all in the name of the Lord. Do all in his name, do all in the name of the Lord. In word or deed, as God decreed, do all in the name of the Lord. Be not deceived by worldly greed, do all in the name of the Lord. The Spirit says in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord. Do all in his name, do all in the name of the Lord. In word or deed, as God decreed, do all in the name of the Lord. Till toils and labors here are done, do all in the name of the Lord. Dear Christian friends, if you'd be one, do all in the name of the Lord. Do all in his name, do all in the name of the Lord. In word or deed, as God decreed, do all in the name of the Lord. Our song of invitation will be 613. 613.
After the Lord's resurrection, and shortly before he ascended back to heaven, he had a meeting with his apostles. And in particular, in the 21st chapter of the Gospel of John, he has a specific conversation with the Apostle Peter. And he said, the text says in verse 15 of John 21, when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, or Jonah, do you love me more than these? He said to him, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, tend my lambs. Then he said to him a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, shepherd my sheep. He said to him a third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know all things. You know I love you. Jesus said to him, tend my sheep. It wasn't too long before this that the Apostle Peter had denied even knowing the Lord. But since that time, Jesus has been resurrected. Peter's been convinced that he's the Lord, and he's giving him a job. And the background was given here from John 21 for our lesson text this morning from 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 1 through 4. We know that this book that we've been walking through has a tremendous amount to do with suffering. We talked in detail about that last Lord's Day. Peter shifts from his general conversation to the average Christian who would be a recipient of this letter to a specific group of men called elders. And the reason we know that he's still talking about the suffering situation because of verse 1 of 1 Peter 5, therefore, I exhort the elders among you as your fellow elder and witness of the sufferings of Christ and a partaker also of the glory that is to be revealed. Shepherd the flock of God among you, exercising oversight and not under compulsion, but voluntarily, according to the will of God, and not for sordid gain, but with eagerness. Nor yet as lording it over those allotted to your charge, but proving to be examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory. When Peter was being challenged by the Lord, and the Lord asked him if he loved him, Jesus used the Greek word agape, the highest level of love. And when Peter answered, he used a different word, phileo. I have affection for you, Lord. I really care about you, Lord. Peter never did in his response use the word agape when he says, you know I love you. You know I care about you. But Peter was being asked by Jesus, do you have the chief concern of my concerns in your heart? My concern is for the people. In John 10, verse 11, he says, the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. That's how much Jesus cared about sheep, spiritual sheep. Peter did not get asked that question when he first started following Jesus. It was only until such a time that Jesus would ascend back to heaven and Peter would challenge him to become an elder, a shepherd, an overseer in the Lord's church. How long did it take? We don't really know, but it wasn't all that long. He became an elder in the Lord's church in Jerusalem. But he had to mature to that point. But Peter writes in 1 Peter 5, as an experienced elder, he says, who am a fellow elder. He did not write to these people as an apostle. He's talking as an elder to elders. You might take the time sometime and look up a map of the area of the churches that would receive the letter that Peter wrote. It was rather large. And a lot of it concentrated in what is modern-day Turkey. So the letter went out to all these churches who would be suffering some kind of persecution, suffering some kind of difficulties because they were Christians. And he speaks directly to the elders in those churches. When you read Acts chapter 14 and verse 23, you'll find that Paul and Barnabas appointed elders in every church. In Titus chapter 1 and verse 5, Paul would write to Titus that to set in order the things that are lacking and appoint elders in every city. It is God's plan for his congregations to have elders. No church will ever be spiritually mature until it gets them. That's what the Bible is teaching. Why is that the case? Because the importance of the role of an elder. I was brought up in the Lord's church. Some of you were as well. And this is the only congregation I've ever been affiliated with that didn't have elders. The congregation I grew up in Chattanooga, the first one, they had elders. When I was restored in 82, I went to a congregation, the church had elders. When I began preaching my first full-time work, even a part-time job when I was at Lipscomb, the church had elders. When I moved to Kentucky for my first full-time work, the church had elders. When I moved from Kentucky to Tennessee to work in Chapel Hill, the church had elders. When I left Chapel Hill and came to Valdosta to work with Forest Park, the Forest Park church had elders. I was thinking about that. The Forest Park church used to meet on River Street in Valdosta. And I got to thinking, what if that River Street congregation had never gotten elders? But they did, over time. And so Peter's writing to the elders in these churches, and he's talking to them as a fellow elder. Not only that, I am a witness of the sufferings of Christ. Peter did run away from the cross, but he still at a distance followed Jesus when he was on trial. He did know what happened. And he's throwing that in there obviously obviously to point back to Jesus suffered, his people are going to suffer, and you people as elders are going to have to help these people. When Paul would speak to the elders in Ephesus, in Acts 20, verse 28, he would say, shepherd the flock of God, over which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers. The church belongs to God. It does not belong to the preacher. It does not belong to the elders. It belongs to the Lord because he purchased it. But Peter says, I want you to shepherd the flock of God. A shepherd would never abandon a sheep. A shepherd would never be unconcerned about any of his sheep. The good shepherd, Jesus said in John 10 verse 11, lays down his life for the sheep. Jesus was not using terminology that was not exaggerative. A good shepherd in some cases might risk and give his own life to save his sheep. That sounds kind of amazing that a physical shepherd would do that for a physical animal, but this physical Jesus did it for spiritual people. I believe there's an implication here. You shepherd the flock of God because Jesus wants you to, and the people need for you to do that. In Matthew chapter 9 and verse 36, when Jesus looked at the people, after he worked miracles, he saw that they were weary and scattered like sheep having no shepherd. Sheep without a shepherd will grow weary. They will be scattered. God, in his wisdom, made it a plan to give the qualifications in 1 Timothy chapter 3 and Titus chapter 1 of elders. And all those qualifications must be met. But then once a man is in the office of an elder, or you have an eldership, the responsibility begins to become very serious. You know, when you think about it, there are a lot of people in the denominational world, most of them who call their preacher a pastor. Well, unless he's an ordained elder, according to the Bible, he's no such thing. I am not a pastor. I'm a preacher. I'm an evangelist. If I were a pastor, there would be at least one other pastor in this church, and we'd call ourselves elders. Because we see in Acts 14:23, they appointed elders in every church. Plural, singular, congregation. Peter says, I'm writing to the elders as a fellow elder, and I tell you what, I didn't just see the sufferings of Christ. There's a glory that will be revealed. He'll come back to that in verse 4. But then he's talking to these men. Shepherd the flock of God among you. Any church that has a bishop over several churches is not following Peter's teaching here. Peter was not the first pope. There's no such thing as a pope. Peter does not claim any superiority over other elders. Did you notice that? I am a fellow elder. I'm no different than you. But he was an apostle. He doesn't mention that, but he was. And he was inspired to write this letter. And I'm so thankful that God had him write it. Put yourself in a congregation out there somewhere, and you're facing hardship. You're a member, you're the preacher, maybe you're one of the elders, maybe a deacon, maybe a new Christian, maybe been a Christian for a long time. Trouble's coming. Persecution is very fiery, as we studied last week. And so it's tough. This becomes then a serious obligation on the part of the elders to take care of God's sheep. You make sure those people are as well taken care of as you possibly can. If they're hurting, you sit down and you find out what's going on with them. If you can't help them, you find somebody who can. If they're struggling because they just lost a loved one, you make sure that you elders, you shepherd these people. Peter didn't say that to preachers. Does that mean preachers can't comfort folks? No, but he's not talking to preachers. He's not talking to the average Christian. He's talking about the people who are right under Jesus in authority. Jesus, as we just read, is the chief shepherd. The elders are right under him with the responsibility to take care of God's sheep. And so he says, you take the oversight, not under compulsion. I think we can understand what he means there. The oversight is an actuality. They do have authority over the church. But the reason that you do something can have a lot to do with your attitude about it. If you do it because you have to, okay, I got that off my checklist. Or but because you care, it makes all the difference in the world. Recently, the toilet tank started leaking at home in one of the bathrooms, and I was hoping it was not cracked. Well, fortunately, all I had to do was tighten up a bolt. That's no big deal. I didn't do that because I wanted to. I did it because there was water all over the floor. And I got it to stop, thankfully. But when you're dealing with people, you're not fixing a loose bolt. You're not fixing a machine. You're dealing with emotions and concerns and hurt and fear at times. And they need guidance from the shepherds in the church. You see why I say a church is not as mature, will never be as mature as it should be without these men? They need to be. We need shepherds. We need elders. We need people to help us. And you can, if you've never been a member of a congregation with a good, strong eldership, you really don't know what you're missing at Adel. If you have, then you do know what you're missing. Does that make us bad people? No. But I'm talking about what Peter writes here. These men are right under Jesus. To shepherd. That means to look after everything that every sheep needs. And you can't pass the buck off to somebody else. It takes time for a man to mature to become an elder, an overseer, a shepherd. Peter was not asked that question early on. Jesus didn't ask him that until he felt like it was time for him to say, look here, boy, it's time for you to step up. I'm leaving. These people need you. They need you. And just think about how Peter could sit in the Bible class and say, you know, this is the way I used to be. And this is what I did here. I know it was wrong. And this is what I did here when Jesus was on trial. And that was awful. But Jesus forgave me. And he asked me to take this job. And I'm here to help. Well, we could all say something like that. But it didn't happen overnight. God does not expect a church to appoint elders when you have no qualified men. That would be sinful. It would be disastrous. I've seen it happen. I've seen congregations appoint men to the eldership who were not qualified. And I've seen the bad results from it. I've worked in congregations like that I refuse to name. There were men appointed to the eldership, never should have been. But there were some very good ones. And so when it comes down to looking at this situation, the flock of God among you, therefore the borders are among the people that they worship with. You don't do it under compulsion. You volunteer to do it. You know where the University of Tennessee football team got its name? Volunteers. Civil War. A lot of Tennesseans volunteered for the Civil War. It's not about Tennessee. It's about an attitude. We want to fight. We want to go. And you're not going to tell us not to go. If there's any way, we're going. Now, that's what a volunteer does. They go because they have a passion for what they're about to get involved in. If you don't have a passion for Christianity, you'll never succeed the way you could. If you and I don't have a passion for serving God, we'll never grow and mature as a Christian as we should. If elders men don't have a passion for being shepherds, then they'll just have their name on the bulletin and meet every now and then and go home. or they will devote themselves to the love and care of God's people. I have a good friend who preaches in another state. He's an elder. But at one time, he preached for smaller congregations like Adel, didn't have elders. So I called him down then to get some advice. He always gives good advice. He says, you know, Brother Roger, I was teaching one time on James chapter 5, I believe it's about verse 16, that if anyone among you is sick, let him call for the elders of the church. He said, I was teaching that. He says, did Paul say call the preacher? No. Did he say call the deacons? No. Did he say call the most mature Christians? No. Did he say call the new Christian? No. He said call the elders. Elders, the word elder implies older. An older person, but not simply in age. But if you read the qualifications, he's not a novice. He's been a Christian for a long time. It's interesting how the word elder in the Greek comes about. In the Roman world, back in when Rome was a nation, the word senator implies an older man. So, senor in Spanish, older. And so they're to be older men because of experience in the kingdom. And so you are to shepherd these people voluntarily, but you do it according to the will of God. Until you and I, sidebar, go to visit people or check on people because we care, not because we had a meeting and we've got a check-off list, we'll never be good at that. But when we start doing it, by the way, some of y'all need to be in those meetings. I'm going to say that again. Some of y'all need to be in our outreach meetings because we need your help. We don't have elders, but we have people that we can use here to still do God's work. Amen? We need some help. I'm off that soapbox, but don't forget what I said. But here again, you come back to the elders voluntarily according to the will of God. Elders cannot shepherd just any way they want to. They have to do it the way God wants it done. Takes us back to maturity and the years of experience. I tell you, the most encouraging visit I ever had with elders. When I was first restored in 82, I'd been out a while, and I'd never had a meeting with any elders in all my life. Never had a need to. Well, I take that back one time. When I first moved out of the house, I went to a congregation to place membership. The elders wanted to meet with me. When I left and didn't come back, they never checked on me. They didn't do their job. Now, I wasn't doing my part either, but they didn't know where I was and evidently didn't care. But when I came back in 82, I met with the elders at East Ridge. Some of the finest men I've ever known in my life. You would have no trouble respecting that eldership or any single one of them. And I've been out living a worldly life, and they knew that. And before the meeting broke up, I remember Brother Alex Watt, I know he's deceased now, he says, well, Brother Roger, if you ever need any help, will you be sure and come to us? You see, I haven't forgotten that. Brother Watts cared. But so do the rest of the men. Elders have to care about sheep and not pass the buck off to somebody else. They are instructed to shepherd the church, not give that to somebody else. That means that they need to be busy about God's business, but they do it because they want to. Takes me back to this. What did Jesus ask Peter in John 21? Do you love me? Agape. Do you have the chief concern or my chief concerns at heart as your interest? Well, I care a lot about you, Lord. That's not what he asked Peter. So a volunteer is one who understands Jesus' question to Peter. And he says, not for sordid gain. Did you know that elders can be paid for their work? Sure they can. An elder can be paid for what they do. If you look, for example, in 1 Timothy 5 in verse 17, read that passage with me where Paul is talking about elders. I remember some years ago, I thought it was kind of humorous, but I think the brother probably put it in his Bible while he was still learning as a Christian. He was looking at 1 Corinthians 9. He had in the margin of his Bible said, okay to pay preacher. So they took a note of it. Well, fine. But what about elders? 1 Timothy 5 at verse 17. The elders who rule well are to be considered worthy of double honor, especially those who work hard at preaching and teaching. Obviously, there are some translations say that he's worthy of a double stipend. He's worth twice as much as what he's getting paid, which implies that they would. And so I have worked in congregations with full-time elders, and it made a difference. One of them refused to be paid. Said, I don't need the money, but he still did the job. Finally, someone convinced him that he ought to be, so he decided he would be. It was okay. Why would you need a full-time elder? Well, let's think about it. I'm preaching beyond this room. When men in God's church are elders and they retire, what do they do with their time if they're elders? What should they be doing with their time if they're elders? Well, they go fishing and they go hunting and they go on vacation trips. How about giving your time to God's people full time and go to that building every day like you expect the preacher to? How about you going out visiting your sheep 2 or 3 times a week and telling the other elders what you're finding out and taking them with you? Shepherd the sheep. And you can get paid for it, don't have to take it. I know some preachers who preach without pay. They don't need the money. That's not the point. They still devote themselves. So Paul would make sure that we understand they could be, but he says you don't need to do it with the wrong motive or just to make money. Filthy lucre is money that's made in an illegal fashion or illegitimately or in a bad way. There are a lot of people who have a lot of jobs just for the money. And I guess that's okay in the secular world. I have to examine myself. Am I here at Adel because I'm getting paid? Partly. But if that's the motive, I need to quit today. If the reason that I'm here is because I'm getting paid, I need to quit now. And that's what Paul is trying to say. Don't do this. If you get paid as an elder, don't do it for the wrong reason. But he says, but with eagerness. Paul keeps coming up with these adjectives that have to do with showing real care and concern for God's people. You remember the parable of the lost sheep in Luke 15? And how that shepherd would leave 99 in the wilderness grazing. They're okay. They got all the grass they need. They got the water. But one of my sheep's out there somewhere, and I don't know where it is, but I'm going to go look for it till I find it. And he did. He brought it home on his shoulders. Said, everybody rejoice with me. My sheep was lost, but I found it. I brought it home. You see the value of a shepherd in that situation. You also see the value of that when you have spiritual shepherds over the church. Find those lost sheep. And you keep looking for them until you find them. If they say, I am not coming back, I'm not coming back, I'm not coming back, at least you got an answer. But more than likely, they'll come back. It may take some time. It may take some time. He says, now you don't lord it over the flock. Do elders have authority? Yes. They have a charge given to them by God to be overseers of everything. That doesn't mean they do everything, but they know what's going on. They know what's going on with the preacher, with the deacons, with the treasurer, if they have one, with the secretary, if they have one, and they know what's going on with their sheep. They know. A good manager or foreman in a certain area of a factory pretty much knows what's going on with every job and every activity in that factory. They may not know anything about the grandchildren of some of their workers, but they know what their workers are doing. So you understand the importance here. But you don't do it lording it over them. You're not people's bosses. I've tried to weigh this out. Paul, you told Timothy in 2 Timothy 4 to preach the word, to be instant in season, out of season. Reprove, rebuke, and exhort with all long suffering and teaching. My authority as a preacher is just that. To study, to learn, understand, to know something about the church and preach to the needs of the church, but I have no obligation as authority, no authority beyond that. I don't have the authority that an elder has. Never will, unless I become one somehow. But these men have authority, but you don't lord it over people. Well, how then, Peter, do you motivate people that you have the responsibility for overseeing to get them to do what they're supposed to do? Give them a living example. Show me the way. When you see elders going to the hospital, when you see elders at funerals, when you see elders visiting their sheep, visiting visitors who come our way, doesn't mean other people can't do it, but when they show interest, and you see them sitting down with their preacher if he's struggling, or trying to guide a new deacon in the right direction, or making sure the Bible teachers or where they ought to be in their teaching, and they're involved in it, they also are to be teachers. That's one of the qualifications. Some of the best lessons I've ever heard didn't come from preachers. They came from elders who studied their Bibles. They walk the walk, they can talk the talk, they know the Bible, and they teach it, and they show us. You know, as a parent, that's true too, isn't it? You can tell your children all day long what to do, but if you don't live in accordance with what you're saying, they won't follow you. They may despise you a little bit. They may laugh about it. They certainly won't do what you want them to do. But when you show them the way, you know, the example was found in Jesus, wasn't it? When Jesus washed those disciples' feet in John 13, he was showing us what an elder ought to do when nobody else is doing it. And what we ought to do. Then he goes on to say, those allotted to your charge. When Paul would speak to the elders in Ephesus in Acts 20, verse 28, he said, I want you to shepherd the flock of God among you, over which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers. Which ones, Lord? Which ones, Paul? Every single one. From the newest convert to that older brother or sister that's been there longer than you have, to those in the middle, to the families who are struggling, and to those who are having issues with this or that, going through marital difficulties, you make sure those people are taken care of. Now, that doesn't mean that elders can't facilitate someone else to help with that. Not all elders are skilled in counseling. So they find someone who is, but they make sure that they're found, and they help them. And he says, proving to be examples to the flock. When you prove something, you demonstrate it. I would to God that this church had elders, and I know some of you do too. The only way any congregation will ever get elders is to plan on it. Somehow, some way. If you can't do something about it today, what kind of seed can you plant today so that one day there will be? Get these children in church. Get these children in Bible classes. You bring up children who will love Jesus, boys and girls, and help them to mature in the faith so that maybe even when you're gone, they'll understand. Maybe they can be elders and elders' wives. You have to start with something. But what do you do in between? Well, the chief shepherd's coming, verse 4. He's coming, and you're going to be given a crown of glory that'll never fade away if you'll do what we're saying. But what do you do with a church that has no elders? Does that mean we're dead? Well, in some cases they are. Doesn't have to be that way. There are things that can be done. Number one, you've got to care about other people. Not on paper, but in your heart. I don't care who it is. Number one, you've got to love God yourself. With all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. You've got to care about other people. And do what you commit to do. Do we sometimes fall short? Raise your hand. Sometimes we fall short. But we need to go back and review our notes and our plans and say, I was going to do this. Well, if it's not too late, do it. Even if a church has elders, members have a responsibility. Elders are only able to do what they can do. You be Jesus' eyes. You be his ears. You look, you listen. You be his hands to care. You be his feet to go. And I'm talking to myself until then. But just think how much better the church would be if we would just all do what we're supposed to do. It would be amazing what we could accomplish. There's an unfading crown of glory for Paul in 1 Timothy 4. There's one for the elders, and there's one for you if you'll be faithful. Revelation 2 and verse 10. Pray for someday this congregation to have elders. If you have a prayer list, put that down and pray about it. You might bring somebody in from some other place. What would be wrong with that? Paul was always sending Timothy or Titus or somebody somewhere to mature the church. If you don't have them here, get them somewhere else, if possible. What about you this morning? Do you need help from the chief shepherd? Do you need help from the chief shepherd? The next section, Paul is talking about not being prideful. So I don't want to be so proud that I don't ever admit that I need help. If you need help this morning from above and we can facilitate, please come as we stand and as we sing.
Take my life and